to now. So that was kind of like my little rambling introduction about autism and empathy, because the article I wanted to talk about, which kind of backs me up on this, is from The Conversation magazine from June 7th, 2019. And this article actually says that autistics almost certainly do struggle with empathy, and this backs up exactly what I was saying. It's June 2019, so quite a recent article. It says that we use empathy to understand other people's feelings and to be able to predict and influence their behaviour. Okay, so that's what empathy is, to understand other people's feelings. It's completely different to sympathy. Sympathy, as I said, is more a kind of gut autonomic response to pain and suffering, where you feel uncomfortable. It's egotistical because it's all about you. You're feeling uncomfortable because someone else is in pain. You need sympathy to have empathy. It's a precursor to empathy. Babies and young children have sympathy. But like I said, when I was a baby and a young child, part of my autism was that I was so in my own little world that I didn't even have sympathy. But that's not because I was a bad person, and I did care. I've always been a caring person. I used to care for my younger brother, and I engaged in caring behaviour. So it wasn't like I was a bad person in any way, but I was very, very inappropriate because I didn't understand people's feelings. And when people were upset, I didn't know they were upset. I didn't feel anything because I couldn't read feelings. I literally was feeling, what's the word for it, blind. Basically, that's it. I was switched off. I switched on sometimes in my teens. I was like, suddenly it kind of clicked, and that's when I stopped being inappropriate, because I started to realise, basically, I started to become more, I don't know, part of the world, I guess, and to know that people were real, they had feelings. I couldn't behave like that essentially because it wasn't good. But of course, if you don't know that the way you're behaving is wrong and you're like basically innocent to it, you're not trying to be bad or anything. It's just that you literally do not understand other people. That's a completely different thing. It's not in a malicious way. It's simply in a not understanding way. That's the confusion, really. But like I said, so sympathy is a precursor to empathy. I now have a lot of sympathy, but I still struggle with empathy, okay? But you do need sympathy to have empathy, but it's not the same thing, because sympathy is, at least when you're sympathetic, basically you are aware of other people, you've developed an understanding of other people to the extent that, and by the way, this awareness of other people in the world, in not typical people, is kind of there from day one, because humans are social creatures. It's just that in autism, this kind of hasn't really come on tap, if you like. In some autistics, it never comes on tap, or people will always remain objects to them. That's the fundamental autistic blindness, really, that people are people, not objects. Like I said, I have developed that awareness, but it came on for me when I was about a teenager. So what am I trying to say? So sympathy is like an egotistical response to someone else's suffering, where you feel pain. But what you do with that awareness, that then leads to empathy. So if you just experience the discomfort that someone else is in pain or whatever, or you've hurt their feelings and you feel discomfort, that's the first step to empathy, but that's not empathy. So you can have that sympathy but still struggle with empathy. And like I said, I think a lot of autistic people, particularly like those who are like really, really profound, may well never develop sympathy just because they're so locked in. But for those like me, I think a lot of us, we do develop sympathy, particularly as we get older, and it can become very, very pronounced. And sometimes we even have more sympathy than a non-autistic person. It can cause us so much overwhelm that we just can't deal with it, and we're often we can become extremely kind of, what's the word for it, tuned into the suffering in the world, and really, really kind of and develop a really strong moral compass and desire to kind of prevent suffering. We can almost become like, I guess a bit like Greta Thunberg, we can become activists and things like that because we care a lot on a kind of intellectual level, at least, about what's going on in the world. So that obviously shows that just because someone struggles with empathy, it doesn't mean that what I'm trying to say is what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say is that struggling with empathy doesn't mean you don't care. That's what I'm trying to say. So, because empathy is used to understand other people's feelings, to be able to predict and influence their behaviour. Empathy is more to do with social skills, okay? But it says here there's still some debate about whether or not people on the autistic spectrum experience empathic difficulties. And this is largely because historically there's been a small number of participants in research. And it's also further complicated by the fact that many autistics also have alexithymia, which is emotional blindness, and that's difficulty understanding your own emotions, so therefore you struggle to understand how others are feeling too. And there's been a lot of debate about whether or not the low empathy scores that a lot of autistic people have isn't to do with their autism, but more to do with alexithymia. That's been a big debate, because a lot of people have alexithymia, but not all autistic people do. But a brand new study has used a large-scale survey of more than 600 adults from the general population, and it was conducted by someone called Punit Shah. So Punit Shah and his team measured the links between autism, alexithymia, and scores on a reliable empathy test. The study found that having more autistic traits is associated with lower empathy, even after factoring alexithymia into the analysis. So in other words, this lower empathy is independent of alexithymia, and therefore it's got to be something fundamental to being autistic that makes you have lower empathy. The study provides some of the best evidence so far that autism is definitely linked to lower empathy. Okay, so what I'm saying before isn't just coming from my mouth, okay? Scientists have actually shown, because it's highly likely, this isn't news to me, I know it as an autistic person, it's just that we have to be all PC these days because of all this confusion in the community about what empathy actually is and isn't. I think that's what's leading us to this confusion, the confusion of empathy and sympathy. So people think low empathy means you're not caring, when it can be the complete opposite. In actual fact, you can have low empathy and be the most extremely caring, sympathetic person ever, but you can still struggle with empathy. They're completely different skill sets. Like I said, babies and toddlers have sympathy, but most people will agree they don't have empathy, because empathy is later to develop. If you're a 2-year-old little toddler, you know, a 2-year-old little toddler, it's all me, me, me. I'm not sharing her toys. No, it's all me. You know, they can't regulate their emotions. They get upset. They can't yet do the kind of, what's the word for it? Basically, a little toddler, it's all about them. They haven't yet developed that ability to kind of like, they haven't yet developed that ability to do the give and take. That in normal child development, that takes time. Normal children from a very young age, though, do affiliate with their carers. That's like the first step towards empathy. They've already shown very strong affiliative behaviour as babies, you know, get joint attention, following the gestures of their carers, bringing toys to their carers, making eye contact, you know, all of these things, trying to get their carers' attention. That shows, you know, that you need to do that in order to develop empathy. Empathy is what comes out of those early affiliative skills. The problem is in autism, those early affiliative skills are often not there. And that means that empathy is obviously going to be impaired, because you need to have that to develop the empathy. What if you've missed that window, it can be very, very hard. You can develop the sympathy. Sympathy is kind of not really that cognitively demanding, though. That's more autonomic. But the empathy may well never become that great. But as it says in this article, this may actually not be a bad thing. First I've heard that struggling with empathy may actually not be a bad thing, so maybe the neurodiversity movement will start seizing on this at some point and start backtracking on their idea that autistics are great at empathy, and start actually saying, no, because, you know, the neurodiversity movement, they like to make everything a positive. Oh, now we're saying that low empathy might be a great thing. Oh, autistic superpower, ha ha ha. So maybe the neurodiversity movement will start changing tack when this gets out. It may not be a bad thing. Selective empathy, for example, understanding some other people's feelings while ignoring the feelings of others, leads to immoral behaviours and exclusion of some groups from society. For example, you prioritise the feelings of friends and family, but you neglect the perspectives of strangers. High levels of logical thinking and rational decision-making are found in autistic people. This means autistics actually make fairer social decisions. For example, they're more likely to share money equally with unfamiliar people. And this maybe lower level of empathy is actually allowing autistic people to make fairer decisions without the undue influence of how others may respond emotionally. See, I thought that was really interesting. The other big interesting point, by the way, is that psychopaths, converse to what many people think, actually have extreme levels of cognitive empathy. So psychopaths are very low on sympathy, and they don't really have feelings for other people, so they're basically cold, basically. But they have extreme levels of cognitive empathy. They can get into other people's heads and they can manipulate them. They know how to do it. They also know how to put on an act. So a psychopath is never what they seem. They can bluff their way into social situations. They can appear really friendly, really charismatic, really nice, really caring. They can appear all of those things, but they're not. They do that to manipulate other people. Psychopathy is the complete opposite to autism, because psychopaths know how other people feel. They're not blind to it, whereas an autistic might accidentally hurt other people, particularly in childhood, because they're completely naive and just don't understand other people as people. Psychopaths, it's the complete opposite. They 100% know they can read other people with absolute precision, sometimes even more than your average person. But they're completely feeling dead to how the other person. They basically don't care about the other person. The other thing about psychopaths is that they have a really high pain threshold, so suffering doesn't faze them. So in other words, they often put themselves into really risky situations. They don't have any fear. It's a complete opposite to autism, basically. Autistics often have extreme fear responses, like I do, for example, extremely fearful, risk adverse. And I think that can sensitise us to pain and make us more kind of reactive when we see other people in pain. I can't watch operations and stuff like that. Psychopaths, by the way, I think they've done some actual brain scans on psychopaths to actually show that psychopaths don't actually flinch when they see pain, which is part of the reason why psychopaths are so dangerous. So it's completely different to autism. So when people say that autistics struggle or even lack empathy, they're not trying to say that they're anywhere near psychopaths. It's a completely different thing, and I think that is where the confusion lies, and it's really unfortunate because it's damaging research. And I like to be precise, and I like to say it as it is, and that's why I'm not shying away from saying that autistic people struggle with empathy, because it's true. Because empathy is what we use to read other people. It's a fundamental skill set. If you struggle with empathy, that's a real handicap. But it does have some advantages, in a weird way, and actually it can also make you less likely to be a Nazi, for example. It can make you less likely to be a fascist. It can make you less likely to go along with tribe. It can make you less likely to be pulled along by group frenzy and hysterics, less likely to join a cult, because you think for yourself and you're not influenced by other people. So, pros and cons. But all in all, struggling with empathy, it can be a real problem because it means you struggle to relate to other people. Okay, so I hope that clarifies the issue. So, thank you for watching.